The injuries just keep on coming. This time, Francisco Alvarez for the New York Mets out 6 to 8 weeks. Should the Mets bring in help? This is Mets Daily, and I'm your host, Jake Brown, at Jake Brown Radio. Make sure you subscribe to Mets Daily. Share the channel with your family and friends. Smash that thumbs up below on YouTube. It really helps us, so give us a thumbs up. Comment below. Do the Mets. Go external and bring in a catcher for when Alvarez is out. And that is something we will examine on today's show where, yes, it is a Monday, March 10th. And yes, I do sound like Christian Bale and Batman, which means you're going to love me. Yes, a bender. A great weekend in New York City, but we're back at it. You saw we were the first show to do a show inside of Mets House NYC. We had a blast there on Friday. I went back on Saturday, and I got Nueva York. I got the Soto shirt, the Juan Soto jersey shirt. It is clean, folks. Look at this. Look at that. That is clean. We got it. I said I was going to wait till his first game, and we'll talk about Soto on today's show, but I caved. It looked too good, and it's a double XL, so leave some room to shrink a little bit. If it does in the wash, we're good to go. But let's get right to it. Of course, over the weekend, news always happens when we don't have a show. Because I was enjoying my time in New York City, I did not do a Saturday or Sunday show, and we normally don't do one. But we are here to react. Francisco Alvarez, tough news, tough break. And as much as I always want to say bubble wrap these guys till April, the injury happened when he was taking a swing in batting practice Saturday. So it wasn't even in a game. For Alvarez, he'll undergo surgery today. It's a fractured hamate bone in his left hand. For the surgery to, help fix that. And, it's unfortunate. This is a guy, as you hear my voice crack, which I don't know if Batman's voice cracked, but I had a good time in Gotham, is that it's his second straight season where Alvarez has suffered an injury to his left hand, and that's his receiving hand. This time is with a swing. Usually, I feel like it's when he just putting his glove a little bit too far and he gets hit by a bat, but 2 years in a row. Last year was a torn thumb ligament, ligament, where he missed 7 weeks, and Luis Torrens had to take over. And again, Luis Torrens in a position where, at least for the month of April, he'll have to take over. Now, it's 6 to 8 weeks. If you look at the timeline, you do the math, that would set up, Carlos Mendoza said it's more 8 weeks. So let's do the math here. 3 weeks, surgeries today, that's end of March 31st. So if you want to say it's 8, add 5, that puts you into about the second week of May where he'd be able to maybe come back. You assume he's going to need a week or two of rehab. To me, that means at the earliest we see Francisco Alvarez, it's mid-May for the New York Mets as their starting catcher. And this is a guy, remember, that called the Mets the best lineup in baseball. He raved about this Mets lineup. And it's a guy we looked at to set the table at the bottom of that order. Alvarez was expected to probably hit 7th in this lineup, and now we won't see him till mid-May, maybe Memorial Day, and the Mets will miss his defense. They'll miss how he calls a game, his energy, his smile, and, next man up mentality for the New York Mets. Here's the issue. The Mets are weak at catcher. Let's look at what the plan is here for these Mets without Alvarez. Luis Torrens is going to be the starting catcher. What I'll say about Luis Torrens, the guy throws out base runners with the best of them, like in the history of the sport. Not the greatest hitter. He hit 304 the first 2 months with the Mets, but August, September, the guy went 6 for 49. So, listen, part of that is Alvarez played more and maybe infrequent playing time. Torrens not as good. When he did play more, he was hitting. So, let's see. I think Luis Torrens has some pop. He's the bottom of the order for you, and he's a decent option. But now you need someone to back him up. Catchers get 1 or 2 days off. So, when you look at the Mets depth chart, it's very weak after that. Jackson Reitz, who the next day when that news happened or the day of, hit a grand slam. I mean, you want to talk about a guy that's motivated to maybe get that backup job. It's Jackson Reitz. Hayden Sanger. These guys, remember, are not on the 40-man roster for the Mets, so they are going to have to figure out how they're going to work the roster to get one of these guys as a backup if they decide to go internal. Singer, essentially a career minor league catcher so far. Same for Reitz. Same for Chris Williams. And I put Kevin Parada on that list because he's kind of the next man up after those guys. But Parada's in Double-A. He has been terrible so far in the minors. And that tells you that even the fact that he's on this list shows you the organizational depth at catcher is maybe the worst position for this New York Mets franchise, which is why you have to look at the right, which is why you need to go to the right side of the screen and look at, what about one of these guys? James McCann and Yasmani Grandal. Those are the two only essential. Yan Gomes is available too. Yan Gomes would not be exciting. McCann and Grandal are the two free agent catchers still on the board. Ring a bell? Yeah. James McCann. Remember, the Mets gave him that nice contract while back with the New York Mets, and boy, did he not live up to it. So Mets fans do have bad memories. 4 years, $40 million was that contract for McCann. He played for the Orioles the last 2 years, but now he's a free agent. I think McCann would be a great move, and here's why. There's less pressure on him now. He'd be a part-time backup catcher. You know, he's a veteran. He's pretty good defensively, good guy in the clubhouse. I think McCann could be an intriguing option, and so is Yasmani Grandal. Yasmani Grandal, a guy the Mets have been interested in the past, has had a pretty long MLB career, 13 years. He was with the Pirates last year. He's got some pop. He hit 9 homers for the Pirates over 72 games. So both those guys make a lot of sense. What doesn't make sense for the Mets is to go with we're happy with what we have internally. Because God forbid if Luis Torrens gets hurt now, you have no catcher. And you can't just forget about a position, one of the most important positions on the field, and just say, no, you know what, we're going to stay with what we got. We don't need anyone. So you have to get one of those guys. Tomas Nido, remember him? Former Met, knows this pitching staff, knows this clubhouse. The Mets would have to trade for him from the Tigers. I don't think it would really cost you anything to get him. You know, he's not going to play in Detroit really much at all. So Tomas Nido is a guy you have an eye on. And then there's no other free agents, but always at the end of the spring, guys get cut, guys get waived. There will be catchers available. So David Stern's saying we're comfortable with what we have internally, all well knowing that catchers become, in any position, comes available when roster cuts happen, when, you know, there's a third string catcher that doesn't make a team and they become available. So there will be someone available. You have to remember when you look at this list, the Atlanta Braves are looking for the same thing. The Braves lost Murphy, their catcher, for about a month, less time than Alvarez, but they may have to go a couple weeks without Murphy. They're also looking at this market for a catcher as well. So the Mets and Braves duking it out for essentially those two free agents. Maybe one gets McCann, one gets Grandal, but inexcusable if the Mets do not bring in a catcher. There's just not enough depth on this team. So unfortunate for Alvarez. Let's hope he comes back and is good. But, man, those left-hand injuries keep dooming him. And that lineup he talked about takes a hit. So let's look at the new Mets projected lineup. You know, the first 5 are pretty much now out there. The report's out there. We know who they are. It'll switch versus righties and lefties. Lindor, Soto. Looks like it's going to be Alonso third most days. Nimmo fourth versus righties. Vientos fourth versus lefties. Vientos fifth versus righties. Nimmo fifth versus lefties. And then Winker versus righties. Marte versus lefties. Starling Marte making his spring debut tonight. You know, right now, as we are recording Mets Daily, he is making his debut at DH. So good to see Starling Marte on the field. And then McNeil now moves up, and Siri versus lefties. And then I put Siri versus righties, McNeil, Acuna, Beatty versus lefties in that 8-hole, and then Torrens and whoever's the backup in the 9. That looks like the Mets lineup. So obviously it does not look as good with Francisco Alvarez. But listen, if Luis Torrens could hold down his end of the fort, it's not a terrible 9-hitter if he could be just okay. And they also need Paul Blackburn to be a little bit better than he's been. Struggles for Paul Blackburn continue, who has not been very good this spring for the Mets. And 2 of the 3 outings, he has not pitched well at all, and he hasn't been able to strike anyone out. You know, the Mets are going to have to think here about, we mentioned the other day, putting Paul Blackburn on the injured list to start the season as he recovers from that spinal fluid leak surgery. And as we look at this Mets rotation and who's on the hill in April, kind of rhymes here as a freestyle Monday on March 10th. You know, you got to think about Blackburn of the IL. I think the Mets may end up doing that. Clay Holmes, tremendous. That's, you know, you got your Senga, you got your Peterson, and now you got Clay Holmes, who has looked marvelous. 9 2/3 innings, no runs. He had 8 strikeouts the other day. He's been, you know, just remarkable for the Mets. Like I said, Blackburn might start in the IL. I think that's the right move. The Mets have 4 days off during the first 26 games of the season. They can likely go 5-man until April 25th. And then, you know, maybe April 25th, that week, last week of April, they get Sean Manaea back. If not, the following week, I think Griffin Canning, who's starting tonight as we record this, is probably part of that opening rotation. No options. Blackburn, easier to IL. You can't really, you can make up an entry for Canning maybe, or maybe he ends up getting hurt. Knock on wood, hopefully not. But as much as Mets fans are down on Griffin Canning, I think we're a little bit more down right now on Paul Blackburn than Griffin Canning. So I think Canning cracks that first 5 with Blackburn on the way out. And I think Tyler McGill, because of Blackburn's struggles, ends up cracking that rotation. And then, like I said, Sean Manaea, end of April, early May. And then Frankie Montas, likely sometime in May for these New York Mets. One guy who will be there from opening day on is Nueva York, Juan Soto. And Juan Soto had some intriguing comments that we heard about that we didn't mention on Friday, but we heard over the weekend on the Abriendo Sports podcast. He said another team offered more money to him than the New York Mets. And I enjoyed hearing that. Now, who knows if it's true, but it'd be a little strange to make that up. It makes you think, to all the naysayers who said he only came for the Mets, is that maybe he could have had more money elsewhere, and he actually did choose the Mets, obviously partially for the money, but for the ownership, for the franchise, for Lindor, for where they're going and the direction. It was nice to hear that someone did offer more. And he mentioned the teams that were interested with the Mets, the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Red Sox, and the Blue Jays. So it wouldn't shock me if the Red Sox offered more, the Dodgers offered more, and it was a lot of deferred money. Remember, the Mets deferred no money in this deal. So I'm sure he thought, hey, I want my money and I want it now. I don't want it when I'm 45, 55, where I'm not going to go out and party like I would, at 26. So he's thinking, give me my cash and give me now, because who knows in 30 years? What if I'm not alive in 30 or 40 years? So he chose the Mets, and I think it was nice for Mets fans to hear that he got money elsewhere. Could be a nice PR comment. Could be him feeding into the fan base. But I don't think he would make that up. So great to hear that news, and great to be back here on a Monday at Mets Daily. What a weekend in New York. Out with, random people you run into sitting next to one of the Blue Jackets players' moms at the Rangers game Sunday. Was at 30 Love Saturday. Was at the Mets house Saturday. Was at the Mets house Friday. New York City, the greatest city in the world, baby. And the New York Mets, the greatest baseball team in the world. And Mets Daily, the greatest show on YouTube in the world. Subscribe to Mets Daily. Smash that thumbs up. Follow me at Jake Brown Radio. And we'll see you tomorrow on a Tuesday right here on Mets Daily. Thanks for watching.